Good evening. Okay, this would be recording, so if you want to go back, my address is there on this first one. Sometimes I wonder if my bees are thinking about me too. This time of year with bigger colonies, sometimes we're thinking about the bees are not that gentle colony that I had at one time that I could do anything with during the spring months. Now, this time of year, they kind of take over. They're ruling their roost now, and we get colonies that we can define as defensive. So I wanted to talk about that and seg into then Africanized bees because they are sort of the epitome then in terms of what we would think as being Africanized. As indicated, yes, I had the distinct pleasure of capturing the second Africanized bee swarm that moved from South America through the isthmus into the country of Panama. And then had a chance to go back and forth to Panama because I was setting up a graduate program there. And so I had a great deal of experience there in some other countries. So I kind of pulled this all together in this Africanized honeybees in the Americas as a way of introducing the topic. So as what I hope we'll try to do is talk a little bit about defensive bees first, because that might be of a greater concern than perhaps tonight or today or this weekend than Africanized bees. Then some Africanized bees basics. Do we need to be concerned? And then circling back and hopefully something about handling defensive bees. So we'll saddle up our steed, put our Napoleon blanket with the skeps and bees, the Napoleonic bee, and off we'll go. All right, Africanized bees, defensive bees. Here's what the bee might say, what defensive bees might be saying. Oh, look, I'm a beekeeper. Ouch, darn it. Ouch, where's my hive tool? Ouch, that smoker's out again. Ouch. I was out in the field today and and a smoker ran out and we had some students out there we're doing a project on Amatraz resistance and the smoker ran out and all of a sudden 3 people got some stings. So and my hand's a little bit bigger this morning, this evening because of the stings today. I tend not to wear gloves. So, why I'm using a word defensive is because I don't like the term aggressive. The biology is defense. They are protecting themselves. They are protecting their queen, whether they know it or not. They're protecting a home. So I prefer the term defensive. They can be downright defensive, or we're going to say, geez, those bees were very aggressive today. Okay. We know that our colony has guards, but the bees that will end up stinging us after they are alerted are the soldiers. So soldiers are those middle-aged bees, worker bees that have been through cleaning, been through nursing. They're the bees that should be the resource and nest building bees, but in our beehives, there's often not much nest building, not the need for much new wax or new comb. And sometimes of the year, there isn't very much to do with resources coming in. So these are the bees that will end up stinging. Okay. The defense is very rapid, but it actually, when we break it down, it's a 4-stage response. Something alerts the colony, whether it's us entering the colony, whether it's an animal, and almost anything. I'll talk about some of those alerting things. Then that activates these bees that are in the colony to come to some sort of change in their behavior. It's not the guard bees. The guard bees have a job to do. They're at the entry. They're smelling incoming bees. So it's the ones that become a colony. When we say a colony is very defensive, it's because we've activated a large number of these inside bees, the soldier bees, and then attracting. So then they are homing in on something. In most cases, they're very good homing in on the disturbance. Us, the beekeeper, looking at the colony, for example, the skunk visiting at night, whatever it might be. And then their last stage of this 4-stage response is stinging or fleeing. Those are 2 pretty serious behaviors. And stinging, of course, they're sacrificing themselves. They don't know it, but that's what's happening. Bee power. You got to have a lot of bees to do anything, and yet they're giving up some adult bees that could do all those things because they have stung. And of course, fleeing is this, exiting the field without trying to protect yourself or the home that you live in. So those are kind of extensive behaviors. When we see activation and attracting, what it is bees flying towards us. They fly towards movement, they fly towards smell, they fly towards where that disturbance has originated, or at least they and their response, feeling that it is originating. As beekeepers, that means normally they're flying at us, and they fly at our face, or to a wristwatch on a arm, on a wrist, because it's different. Lots of good features, and of course we are expelling carbon dioxide as we're breathing out. And bees are pretty sensitive. They have a very good carbon dioxide sensing mechanism in their antenna, and so they're oriented to those things. So things that are moving and things that have a higher level of carbon dioxide, and that usually means our face. Okay. They fly towards something, as I indicate. Their initial behavior when they come out, the soldiers, is not to sting or not to run away, not to flee, but to intimidate. So our first notice of our bees when we open them is they're bouncing off our veil, because that's where all the features are bouncing off us. That's what they're trying to do. Okay. When we talk about a colony that's defensive, what we're saying is it's not anything that bees don't do. It's just that maybe that particular colony, or in case of Africanized bees, that grouping, that ecotype of bees, the Africanized bees, they just are more responsive. They are just more likely to do the defense. They're more quick, and they may persist in that behavior. So some parameters on what we might call them in terms of saying my colony is very aggressive, or they're being defensive in their behavior. Okay, big list, 10 reasons. We can probably come up with 20, 30, but here's 10 big ones. Normally, they're they're doing that stinging behavior, the defensive behavior, because we're in the colony. We're messing with them. We've opened up the colony. We've exposed it to light, different conditions, and we've made some noises, some scraping noises. Even though we're trying to be very, very careful, we're still disturbing, and that's those bees that are responding to that. So in most cases, bees become defensive because we are disturbing them. They are simply reacting to that disturbance. Big colonies become defensive, and there's several reasons for that, but it's just a numbers game. There just are more potential bees that can be soldiers. In other words, more potential bees that can, on being alerted, can respond. And so you get one bee out bouncing off your veil, so what? You get 10 or 20 or more, and it can make a difference. So big colonies. There's certainly genetic components to defense. It is not a simple one gene or a smaller number of gene moderated behavior. It is a very, very complex behavior. Each of the steps that I indicated, the 4 steps, are probably are related to different genes, and it depends on what the genetic makeup of a colony is in terms of what it might potentially be when alerted, defensive, or how defensive it might be. So there's definitely a genetic component. They're sensitive to weather. Weather changes will be a factor. We may not even be aware of that. Winds that comes up, a change in the barometric pressure, humidity, for example, they're sensitive to all those, and they sense those very, very well, where we don't. We don't have the right sensors for much of that, but they're sensitive to all of those. And they're sensitive in relative to their foraging, and of course, in terms of their defense of the home. Hangry bees, bees that are in a situation where there are poor resources. Meaning a couple of things. One is there's more bees at home, more bees that could become soldiers. But secondly, the resources, poor resources, are a stressor for colonies, and so defensiveness is sometimes related to that level of stressors that are the individual bees and collectively the whole colony is being exposed to. So term that we can call the hangry bees, bees that are hungry because there aren't much resources. Bees then become angry because, putting it anthropomorphically, the resources are pretty poor. How dare we as a beekeeper put them in this situation and they don't have anything of resources? Well, they're going to show us. No, that's of course not what's going on, but definitely we can see this, we can measure this, we can do this as a series of experiments to show that bees within poor resources, or when good resources dry up or are changed because of rainy weather, for colder weather, for example. All of those are instances where all of a sudden we might have a colony that we would then call as defensive. Colonies that are queenless, a big stressor, often are again expressing that stress in terms of their levels of a defense of the colony. In the case of bees, of course, we know that they have, with the sting, they have some alarm glands, some additional glands. We don't understand what all the chemicals in all the glands, there's a series of glands work, but we do know that there is at least one series of compounds that releases behavior of defense. So they are responding to a stimulus of a sting. So we have something on our protective equipment, our bee suit or whatever, and it gets a sting, and a sting stays in it. Okay, and we may not be aware of it, but certainly the bees are, and so all of a sudden a colony is defensive. It's defensive because they're just being bees. They're defending. They're responding to an alarm odor that one of their sisters has so conveniently put into the clothing of, the hide of, the underbelly of the invader, of the thing that needs to be repelled from the colony. So they're just simply defending against that. Okay. Movement in front of the colony, movement that is a vibration of some sorts or whatever. Vibration, certainly. We're just simply not aware of it. Beekeepers in the guild that are the artists, there's probably maybe half a dozen people in your guild that you can identify that way. That they're so very tuned in and aware of bees that like they're choreographing their inspection of a colony. And one of the things that they're avoiding, that you or I may not, or certainly beginners often don't do, is these bumps and these things that go boom in the night. In other words, the vibrations. The skilled beekeepers just don't, those things don't happen as they look in a colony, as they remove a frame, as they take the cover off, as they take one box off from another one, for example. And then predators. We may not be aware that they're being disturbed in the evening by a skunk or raccoons, or being scratched on by a carnivore, an animal, a cow or a deer or something. That's disturbing them, and they're well aware of it. Okay. And so we go in the next day all set up to have a great bee experience, and they're already been alerted because something's been bothering them, at night or at some other time. The illustration I have there is, so in response to Africanized bees, all of the countries, virtually all the countries, set up a queen rearing operation, courtesy of their Secretary of Agriculture, Department of Agriculture, or whatever it might be. And so this was Panama's idiot. And the issue was that with the arrival of Africanized bees, well, we have to have some isolation. We have to keep our stock gentle. So if we try to do our queen rearing in a place where there's a lot of beekeeping, we're, without artificial, with not being able to do artificial insemination, well, we're going to have the admixture of the material, Africanized males, with our virgin Italian or virgin European queens, and we're not going to solve this issue of the bees becoming very defensive, Africanized bees becoming very defensive. So this was the Panama's response to that. So some of the countries went offshore to an isolated island. In the case of Panama, they went offshore from their major agricultural province along the border with Costa Rica, and it was a prison island. The island has a prison on it, and that's where they set up their isolated queen rearing. Well, the one perhaps flaw you see in that reasoning is, if it wasn't an island that supported beekeeping, it certainly wasn't going to be an island that would support queen rearing operation. Or it had other issues that were going on, like prisoners on the island moving around and bothering colonies and disturbing colonies. So most of these were abject failures. The other thing we kept doing was introducing Italian bees to colonies, and one of the big differences is that this Africanized bee that all of the countries were initially faced with is such a great competitor that when you put a Africanized bee colony, whether it was feral in a tree or as was in one of your colonies, and you also brought into the apiary a gentle colony of European bees, because that was your queen stock. The Africanized bees thrived, and the European bees went downhill very quickly. They can't compete. They could not compete with what was the Africanized bee, and getting the resources in terms of defending, putting out males for mating. The Africanized bee has a marvelous biological methods to keep its own identity, and the two side by side just do not work in any of the countries. And we repeated that lesson over and over and over and over again of buying massive numbers of queens, introducing them when the Africanized bees invaded, and having no success whatsoever. So 10 reasons bees are defensive. I don't know if there is a mic in the room, or if someone has a comment or something else that they may have noticed that why they think their bees became defensive. Be glad to see if we can get some input for anyone. The host here can repeat a question or a comment if someone has one at this point.
Yeah, we do have a mic, and we'll solicit that. Does anyone have anything they want to say? Yeah.
Yeah, hi, Wolfgang here. I don't know if you can hear me or not.
I can, yes. Yeah.
We have noticed here that sometimes my wife, and we don't know which perfume it is, but when she has perfume on and goes outside, bees come and seem to be defensive to her.
So what is happening? Basically, they are attractive to odors. Certain odors are very, very attractive. And so they come and investigate. And for a lot of people, we don't like a bee around us investigating. And so one of the things we do behavior-wise is we seek to discourage that bee from investigating us. And so the bees are really simply responding to behavior that we're doing, trying to, what we call the windmill, trying to wave our arms, wave that bee. That's very natural response. Try to wave that bee away. So yes, they are attracted to the odor. If we get stung when they're around us, it's usually because as humans, we didn't understand what the bee was there for, and we alerted the bee and threatened the bee in some sort, and it just retaliated.
Fair enough.
I would like to ask you a question. When I started beekeeping, I was buying Russian queens, and there were a little.
Whoop,
And
I've
one of
lost
the
us.
queen breeder, he recommended
Yep.
me to put some moving object in front of the hive. He said that bees can be trained, and it's proved by many, many, many scientists. So, and I put in front of the hive, not right in front, but I would say 4 feet away. How to call this wind, like the, yeah. And in the 2 months, my bees stopped stinging me, stops going after me all over the backyard. So what do you think about it?
I'll start with the first comment, and that is among of all the bees we might have available in the U.S., we do know that Russian bee stock being maintained by a group of breeders, the Russian bee breeders, is a bee that is generally more defensive than our what we would call an Italian bee or a Carniolan bee. So one, they are a bee that's more defensive. In terms of can we overstimulate a behavior such as this, such as continually upsetting our bees, and so that they then eventually change their behavior? I'm not convinced that we can, but you have an instance where perhaps in your situation, what you did was enough to change some behavior. Bees have a very short memory, about a 2-day memory of some things. And if you go into if you're a once a week beekeeper, go into your bees every week and you say, well, they're my bees and they're used to me, so they don't sting me. But if my neighbor came over, my neighbor would get stung. That's because my bees know me and not my neighbor, so they're stinging my neighbor and not stinging me. And there's no validity to that at all. They just don't have the memory to be able to remember you, the beekeeper, coming and inspecting a colony. What happens is we just get more skilled in handling our bees, and so we get less stings. Now, in this situation where something was moving all the time in front of them, I'm at a loss as to what might have been that factor. I don't think we can so overstimulate them that they don't then behave. I think what has happened is you have developed the skills in looking at colonies. You got stung and say, well, I won't do that again, consciously or subconsciously. And so you develop the skills to be able to handle Russian bees so that after a few times maybe of getting stung, you were then skillful enough to avoid doing that alerting and getting stung the next time. So I don't think it was the waving arms. I think it was you had gained the skills of being handle the bees that you were dealing with. Any others? Okay. If someone has one, by the way, just jump in and it would, something.
What you said, I understand that I got trained, not my bees.
Exactly. One of the things I did with the Panamanian beekeepers, and we then duplicated that everywhere, is that we had some, fairly substantial size in the Americas. The substantial size is 50 colonies of bees, not 5,000 like in the U.S. But we had about a dozen of them, and so I arranged for them to go to Brazil, and we went to a beekeeper in Brazil, and we asked them to, we're trying to show what the Africanized bee was. And so we said, okay, open the colony. And they did. And all real defensive behavior was released. And then I had the Brazilian beekeeper do the same thing, and he didn't get any stings. We didn't have bees flying in front of our veil. And all I was doing was pointing out that the beekeeper had been trained by the bees to be able to handle a
Question?
bee that was more defensive. And we
Um,
repeated that many times over with many different groups after we got them stung up first.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I've experienced when I'm fully suited, the 4 movements of bees coming up close to me, bumping my veil, getting more close, and then just buzzing around me. But I don't care because I'm wearing a suit. But occasionally I go out and look at my bees, and I'm not wearing anything. And the question I have is, when is the best time to say to yourself, I guess it's time to leave, so that I don't get stung? When
Well, with Africanized bees, I always left after I got 100 stings in any one day. That was enough for that day. I didn't do any more colony inspections. But seriously, individual, how you feel individually. If you are a surgeon, probably stings on the hands are not a good idea. Stings in the face are never a good idea because you get all kinds of comments from your friends and colleagues and workmates, etc. I always recommend a veil. There certainly are times I do wear minimal PPE, personal protective equipment. My hand is swollen today because I tend not to wear gloves, and we were working along, and all of a sudden everyone was getting stung, and we had this one colony that was just very different, and it was stinging everyone, not just me. And so before I knew it, I had like a half a dozen stings on my hand without gloves. So it's personal. So I have been, I had a workshop a week or so ago, and it was an open hive, and I was showing them basically, when we have supers on, we have more difficulty with mite control. So I was going through what kind of mite controls can we use when we have supers on our colony, and at the same time saying, does this colony need another super? In other words, supering behavior and handling mite control while we have supers on colonies. That was our workshop idea of what I was trying to do. And I had a colony open, and the super was ungodly heavy. So I had a person step up to help lift the super off. Well, that person scraped the super, removing it because it was god awful heavy. Scraped it right across the queen excluder. And so, I mean, talk about alerting. We crushed bees, released the alarm motor just by that scraping behavior and all the vibration. And I then took this queen excluder off and was looking in the brood area. I was showing them how we would impale cap drones to look for mites and kill mites in the colony. And I had to put gloves on to close that colony back up. But it was us. It was our behavior with that particular colony, a reason. So, I will wear gloves. Usually I'll have them in my pocket. I usually won't be wearing them. I just like to touch with my hands. The bees are saying something with stinging, and beekeeping is a communication. It's 2 ways. We're trying to tell the bees what we want them to do, and they're trying to tell us to get the hell out of there. Don't bother me. And we told them that we don't have any respect for you, the way that super was taken off the colony. So they were just telling us back. Yeah.
I have one more question. What do you prefer? You prefer be stung and have, bees who are great docile bees, but they won't be able to survive over winter, and you have to buy queen or colony every year. What is your preference?
So I'm a 5-colony beekeeper these days, and I prefer gentle bees. I spend about 3 or 4 months in Bolivia with Africanized bees, and I prefer defensive bees there. Commercial beekeepers prefer bees that are more defensive, and the way they handle bees, their bees are more defensive. Most backyarders would say docile bees. So it's just a personal preference, seriously.
I don't think it's a personal, because we have bees and we have neighbors, and we have to think about them too.
Well, we should, and we should do more of thinking about our neighbors, but I'll tell you, there are an awful lot of backyard beekeepers they're not thinking about their neighbors. A lot of stealth beekeepers, they're trying to hide their beekeeping from their neighbors, and that's the most they're thinking about them. Well, if you know, if I hide them, they won't know I'm a beekeeper. Yeah, most of us prefer docile. There's nothing to the thing that a more defensive colony is a better honey producer, although a lot of people know that. What it is what it often is we just simply are leaving them alone a hell of a lot more, let the bees do their own thing. Best of our intentions in beekeeping is not good for the bees. You know, we should leave them a lot more alone than we really do. But, you know, we're beekeepers. I have an article on defensive bees. This is actually wrong. It's not Bee Culture. It's American Bee Journal. Same April 2021, but it's American Bee Journal handling defensive bees. If you don't have a copy, I'll be glad to send you one, complete with photos and things. I've used my email. I'll send you one. So now we've got supers on our colony. Here we got two medium supers, the green one on top, then the white one, and we got 2 full-size hive bodies. We've got our winter insulation in the cover that's up at the top. We've got in the summer, usually we've only got R5, 1 piece of foam, not 2. Winter, our bottom board. Could it be just summer? Big colonies, there's less for the workers to do. There's bigger population, of course, less pollen available. They don't need pollen now this time of year. They'll need it a little bit later, and they certainly needed a lot of it in the spring, but they don't need it right now. Flowers for nectar. So the work that I was doing today on the resistance was in a seed growing area. So the bees are pollinating carrots and onions and cilantro, radish, cabbage. There's a whole bunch of different things that they're pollinating in this area. It's an irrigation agriculture area, and you know, towards the by the middle of the day, many of those flowers have simply desiccated, dried up from them. It was about 95 and windy today as usual. And you know, the foragers that were out first thing in the morning are nothing more for them to do. So we go into a colony midday and there's more bees at home and more soldiers. You know, it's kind of that simple, really. We think that when bees have more stores, they are more defensive. There's a couple of studies that would point to that, but nothing very definite. Maybe they do because they got more food, but we certainly do know when they're hangry, when they're stressed, there's not much food out there for them available, then they are more defensive. We've had some good studies on that as well. When bees have more mites, elevated temperature conditions outside the environment, windy and temperature, it's not a great flight conditions. So, you know, seemingly no limit to the factors that might be packed into why that colony you started, nice and gentle, nice gentle stock. You know, you have some experience with bees and you're handling them the right way. All of a sudden, this time of year, they become kind of a monster, kind of a colony you don't want to do very much with because it's summer and because it's the conditions that are just favorable for release of these behaviors that we call defense in the colonies. So how do we recognize at any one time, we can have a colony that's just really peaceful. At some time, it can all of a sudden be a defensive colony when we're into it, when we're looking at it. That doesn't necessarily mean that they are defensive. So here's some conditions that I would say that we might help define what we're really talking about with defensive. The bees are in your face before you're doing anything. You haven't pulled your veil over because you're still lighting your smoker. You're getting your equipment together, et cetera, and all of a sudden you got bees around you, bees that are, like I say, in your face right away, and you haven't done anything. Maybe you walked in front of them, maybe nothing more than that. You haven't even got the smoker going. Bees that sting away from their hive as you're approaching them, or someone is walking on a sidewalk by in front of your house, alongside of your house where the bees are, and they're stinging that situation. Certainly defensive is it's an excessive response, and it develops very quickly, very rapidly. Walking in front of the colony, and all of a sudden you've got a bunch of bees around your face, or bystanders or animals that are, your dog went with you, and all of a sudden it's yipping away because it also got a sting on its rump and is trying to get out of there really fast. Continued response following that alerting. In other words, they just don't give up. All right. So you got a sting in your glove, you got a sting in your veil, in your protective equipment. They're responding to that, and they just, not just a bee, not just curious bees flying around, but more bees attempting to sting to that particular spot. And certainly we can have a one-off. All of a sudden one day your bees are very defensive, and the next day they're their normal self. So it's more than a one-off. It's continues again. It's not a one-off event. So those are sort of some of the things we would pack into being called defensive, or bees being defensive. All right, where are we? Here's Fred. He says, face it, Fred, we're lost. Okay. Trying to navigate inside their comb. All those cells, all of them are cells. Africanized bee basics. Let's do a little bit about that. So the population we're talking about is a group of bees that were brought from their area where they developed. At one time we called these races. We still can. Subspecies, and actually gave them a Latinized third name, Apis mellifera, for example, the German bee, so-called German bee. The one that I've circled is a group called Scutellata, and that's a grouping of bees that existed from the Red Sea, the Ethiopian area, all the way to the south of Africa, in Eastern Africa, not in the tropics of the regions to the west there, but more to the east. Huge number variations of habitat, but a bee that survived in many of those areas. It then bounced up against some others that were on some of the mountaintops along the coast. There's another grouping of bees that has different characteristics. We look at morphological, what they look like, and behavioral, what they act like, etc. And those are all the things that went into our description of a race. Basically, a race is a geographical variant, a geographical variant that over time developed a very specific response to the environment that it lived in. And it lived in an environment that was different enough from other honeybees that developed other characteristics. So on top of the higher peaks of this Eastern African region, there was the Monticola, another race of bees or subspecies of bees that because of the different temperature and floral conditions near the top of the mountains, it was a different bee that was then at the base of the mountains. And so Scutellata was a grouping of bees at the base, and Monticola at the top. Littoral was a coastal variation. So a bee that exhibited a fairly wide area. And we believe, well, we have a couple different competing theories, but certainly our bees came out of Africa. came into Europe as the ice covering of northern Europe receded. They spread. A grouping of bees came through western Africa, where because of mountain ranges and things, there were several different races crossed into Spain and then on into Europe. Those that went below the Alps developed into what we call the Italian bees. Those north of the Alps developed into the mellifera. A bee stayed the same in Spain and Portugal. So, and then another group of bees came through the Middle East, where there are a bunch of different groupings as well. So Europe was inhabited from bees from Africa. So the point being that the bees in Africa had been there an awful long time. And so there was a lot of interactions with humans. We think perhaps one of the oldest alcoholic beverages was a mead, and that was made by people that had access to bees in Africa. They are subject to different pests in the past in Africa, and humans and our primate relatives, our primate cousins, learned to steal from honeybees. And so this interaction with humans over centuries and centuries and centuries developed, at least in this grouping of bees, Scutellata, a bee that was very defensive. Now, the bee that's in the tropical area of Africa, Adansonii, is one of the gentlest bees. This bee that's on top of the Mount Kilimanjaro, Mount Kenya, the Monticola, is also a very gentle bee, relatively speaking. But for whatever reasons, Scutellata is recognized worldwide as one of the most defensive. And it was in part because of its environment, in part because of interactions with humans and primates and other organisms as well. The cutting there on the right shows a Maasai warrior in the process of harvesting a natural colony, colony that he's enticed into that rolled up bark. He's lit a fire and he has a torch, and he's at the point now to drive the bees away and to harvest from them. And that's a very common destruct harvest. Well, that's an interaction with humans that causes bees also to be defensive. And so we have the smoke and the fire to force the bees to go somewhere else so we can then steal their riches. Well, that's a behavior management system that's been going on for centuries and centuries and centuries, and is perhaps one of the reasons leading to a defensive bee, the bee Scutellata. And that's the bee that was brought then to the Americas, okay? So I'm showing the two routes of bees leaving Africa and then being isolated geographically on the Caucasian mountains, the Carniolan mountains, the south of the Alps into the Italian peninsula, the Iberian peninsula of Spain. And so those then through time develop distinctness so that we call their an Italian bee. We call it a Carniolan bee today because of that isolation. A couple people that have looked at in terms of naming bees and things, Hepburn and Radloff. Honeybees of Africa ranked aggression across African subspecies, but characterized defensive behavior as follows. Whatever the perceived average level of aggressiveness for a subspecies, individual colonies will exhibit a range themselves of behavior from docile to aggressive, even within the same apiary. Large, and they're talking about this Scutellata, so that's the green population that we're talking about on this other map. Large populous colonies are more aggressive and effective at nest defense. Notice we got both words there. And finally, there's a high degree of unpredictability in this behavior, making a clear-cut ethological, in other words, a behavior analysis difficult. So it ranges across a long area, but it was eventually the one that was selected to be introduced into Brazil. Okay. So a bee that came out of East Africa, handled centuries and centuries, a lot of interactions with humans, to Brazil, where at the time, at the introduction, there was a big mixture beekeepers that were skilled using European techniques, a Langstroth type hive, in other words, a movable comb hive of some sort, and a lot of rustic hives. So the hive on top right is a rustic, top left is a sort of like a Langstroth. Hope maybe it has movable frames or not. And in the process, the bees and beekeepers changed of the Americas. We had to change. So why did people, individuals, research scientists, a geneticist, a very good one, try to bring this bee to the Americas? It was an effort paid for by the beekeepers of Brazil to improve the bee stock. Brazil is like the fifth largest landmass area of all the countries in the world, but was like 27th in honey production. And so the beekeepers wanted to find, is there a better bee somewhere else? So the geneticists went around the world looking at these races, these subspecies. He made several selections, and commerce with Brazil is through Portugal. He put them in queen cages, and he sent them in some sort of a courier. They went first to Portugal, and someone found all these live bees in this package and killed them all. All of his selection that he'd spent several months making to send back to Brazil. So as he's leaving to go back home, he put some queens in his pocket from 2 queen producers in the southern part of Brazil, and some bees that he still had from what was then Tanganyika, Tanzania today, just north of South Africa. And that's what was the introduction of roughly 30 queens that he smuggled home because his selected stock had been killed in transit by authorities. So, doesn't that sound crazy? Who in the heck would think of something like that? Well, we did it. We did it in the 1860s when Langstroth and Carey and beekeeper in Ohio, another one in Illinois, said what the U.S. needs is bees from Italy, because we've heard great reports of bees in northern Italy. Gentle, the beekeepers don't even wear veils. They don't use smokers, just these nice, beautiful bees, very productive. That's what we need in the U.S. And so they smuggled Italian bees into the United States. The USDA even sent a scientist by the name of Benton. You've heard of the Benton introducing queen cage. Well, the same guy, Benton, was a USDA scientist. And he traveled, and he actually facilitated introduction to the carniolan bee, introduction of what's called the Caucasian bee further east in Russia, in present-day Russia, Soviet Union. So we did the same thing. Certainly, we would say in the case of the bees coming from the Scutellata bees coming from South Africa and Tanganyika into Brazil was not good. Was bad. But on the same thing, our bringing Italian bees into the U.S. was a good thing. Okay, so one good, one bad. So each of them were a one-off, but it's one worked well, one didn't work quite as well. So we think of it crazy. Well, the craziest thing that happened was that this bee maintained its own identity. It has at least we can identify 5 isolating mechanisms. So when its virgin queens go out to mate, they tend to mate with drones that are Africanized. And when any queen in that vicinity goes out to mate, they tend to mate with Africanized drones. One of the isolating mechanisms that helps them maintain their own identity and helps them change what is in an area. And so after the introduction in 1957, there was a quote, an error. Bees were released, and then they started releasing virgin queens right away to the producers. Since the beekeepers had paid for the trip, they wanted the results. They wanted queens. And so they were releasing virgin queens of pure Africanized bees, African bees into the Americas and to Brazil. People have tried to change the name. So Africanized symbolizes that the African bees crossed with the European bees that were in Brazil at the time. So it was a hybrid, something in between the two. Well, that's not true because the African bee has so many of these isolating mechanisms. It maintained its own identity, and for all the European maintained bees in Brazil, it started changing every one of them over to what it was. So it wasn't an hybridization, it was one ecotype, one type of bee taking over because they were better suited to the habitat than were European bees, the northern European bees, the bees from Portugal that had been earlier introduced into Brazil. Okay. Other names, the Brazilian bee, the press named them the assassin bee. People like to say, well, they're a neotropical bee. That's the habitat of Brazil and that part of Africa, for example. The thorn bee, and the Time magazine on reading stories in the Brazilian newspapers about this bee thought that well, the assassin bee was too sensitive for the readers of Time magazine, so they didn't use that. They called it the killer bee, and that's where the term, what some of us have heard, killer bee, came from. Time magazine. They had a whole cover with it, with it as to introduce this bee that was terrorizing the people of Brazil. One of the big stories was of a busload of kids. Some bees entered the busload. The bus ran off the road, killed three of the kids. And of course, the story was not the bus running off the road and overturning. It was the bees killed the kids. And so, assassin bee or killer bee was what the press would label it. Well, they spread naturally, maintaining their own identity. We did several things to try to reduce their spread. We populated the country of Venezuela with beekeepers, hundreds of them. And so when the Africanized bee stock arrived from Brazil into the country of Venezuela, Venezuela holds the distinction of having more individuals killed in the first 3 years, human individuals killed by massive bee stings than any other country. And it was that we had given free U.S. Taxpayer money had given free bees and trained beekeepers. And so all across Venezuela is this huge number of brand new beekeepers, and all of a sudden their bees change over to Africanized and they get stung and their kids get stung and their animals get stung. And unfortunately, Venezuela holds that distinction of more human death stings than anywhere else. And it's all because of an attempt by well-meaning U.S. bee research people to stop the spread of the bee before it came into the Isthmus of Panama, stop it in Venezuela. We tried we had proposals in the Isthmus of Panama. We owned at the time the Panama Canal, 5 miles of either side of the canal itself. And we had a proposal that we would we would nuke everything living plant-wise in the 5 miles on either side, a 10-mile barrier. And so surely these Africanized bees, as they spread from South America, would have this barren 10-mile zone on either side of the canal. There would not be nothing for them to feed, so they would fall down dead, starve to death, and that would halt their spread northward. Thankfully, we did not spray. We did spray some areas, but not all 5 miles on either side of the canal, destroying all the plant life. Because these bees are capable of flying a rather long distance. They'll easily fly to miles, 40, 50 miles off the coast. Time and time again, we've seen that. A swarm of bees, all right? We tried in the Isthmus of Mexico, the same thing. Spent well over $20 million in a 3-year program that finally we decided we give up. We didn't stop them. So they arrived in the U.S. In 1994, Mexico 1990. And we know this because all of a sudden the bees that were being kept by beekeepers became very defensive, but more specifically, animals and people were then being stung to death. Animals that were penned, animals that could not escape. Uh, the bees are just very highly defensive and do a lot of stinging. And so horses that were tethered, animals that were corralled, chickens that just run around in circles, dogs that were the nursing mothers, for example, trying to protect their pups and not running away when they started getting stung, and being stung to death. And so animal death and human death was our early warning that the bees were now had switched over to Africanized bees. And of course, eventually, with some of my tests in Panama and USDA tests in Venezuela, we were able to start identifying what some of the characteristics were of Africanized bees, and so we could do some tests. For a while, we kept track of their spread. So you look at this map of the U.S., the southern tier of states and the second tier of states. And up until about 2014, we kept maps, and you can see the different colors. They came independently into Texas. They came independently into Arizona, and they came independently into Southern California around San Diego. Different populations moving from that introduction in the south of Mexico in 1990, moving across Mexico on either side of the Sierra Madre. So the group that were in Texas were the east side. The group that ended up in California were the west side of the central mid-rib of mountains in Mexico. The introduction into Florida was the same as the Caribbean islands. That was by humans, by shipping. So it came into there much a little bit later. So today, and this is not a current map because no one's keeping the map. Today, there are in the first tier of states across the southern border of the U.S. and into the second tier of states, and in some places they are up into the third tier of states across. There is one big exception. If you know your geography, on the East Coast, north of Florida, is the state of Georgia. And the state of Georgia officially says that they have no Africanized bees in Georgia. They've eliminated all of them. However, when a researcher from Purdue looked at them genetically, he discovered there's about 26% of the colonies in the state of Georgia have at least some expression of the Africanized genes, okay? The state authorities ran them out. They ran them out of a meeting, in fact, when he tried to present that information to the beekeepers of Georgia. So officially, there are none in Georgia, the second tier of states there. Okay, they're in Tennessee, they're in the Carolinas, and they have been spread to other places by humans, right? So let's come to what you're most interested in California. Our first document of them in the state is 1994, 4 years after we documented them in the very southern area of Texas, for example. Western route through Mexico. Most of the work that we have, so they are more prominent in locations that are subtropical. They are a neotropical bee, meaning they like tropics, those type of environmental conditions. But we have some subtropical areas. And of course, San Diego per se is a Mediterranean habitat, but it's the rest of the San Diego County and Ventura County, Imperial County, that's pretty tropical. It's pretty darn hot down there these days. All right. So we've looked at there in a 2015 study, plus one, they looked at 265 bees and 91 different sites. And they found that Africanized honeybees had moved from that southern border and were near Sacramento. But had only moved 150 miles further north from a study in 2006. So in a period of 10 years, they had only moved 155 miles. When they were initially in Brazil, there are documented movement of the colonies of almost 300 miles per year. So in 10 years, moving only 155 miles means they're moving into your area, moving into California at a much, much slower rate than they did, at least in the tropical, subtropical regions of the Americas, right? In the study, 60% of the bees in San Diego County were Africanized, but when they then went to manage bee colonies and took bees off the entrance, only 13% were considered Africanized. Now we've got a real issue here. So they're looking, the research these days is looking at genetic markers. And so you can tell the difference between European bee and Africanized bee by some genes, some genetic markers. And they're not saying that the colony is expressing all the behavior of an Africanized colony. But what they're saying with the studies is that they are able to detect genetic material that is African stock, Africanized stock, by looking at these genes, these marker genes, okay? One other study that, so this was a study in 2006. The San Diego County is white because that's expressed up above that insert at the top right. So red is Africanized. The orange was indeterminate, had some genes. And the green, the colonies were determined, the genetics they looked at, those would be European colonies. And you can see in 2006, coming up the coast from San Diego through LA, Santa Barbara County, for example, some greens, some reds, but then above Big Sur and above, San Francisco Bay Area, the Salinas area, all of those in 2006 you can see are all pretty much green, a little bit of indeterminates as well thrown in. 256 bees total in that study. Okay, so this study was updated by UC San Diego people in 2018, Lynn and colleagues. You can see the expression there. Africanized honeybees extend their distribution, and again, they went and collected feral bees, in other words, not to beekeeper colonies, but to feral bees on flowers, basically, and looked at their genetics. And so all of the counties you see there in red had Africanized bees. The queen rearing area of the couple of counties around the bay, and then northward from that, Sacramento, Nevada County, Yolo, I think Sonoma, and on up into where there's a big concentration of queen rearers, Yolo County, I believe that is, it had a mixture, but most of the counties considered to be European colonies, not the Africanized. And again, this was not a huge number, but at least they had something like 3,000 bees in their particular sample that they looked at. Now, one of the things that I've had a chance to look at in South America in my travels to Bolivia. Our neighbor to the south is Argentina. So after the bee escaped and then was introduced to beekeepers in Brazil in 1957, the bee spread to neighboring countries, to Paraguay, to Bolivia, and then southward into Argentina. However, what has and into Uruguay as well, south of Brazil. But what has basically occurred in those countries is that in the north of both of those countries, northern Argentina, northern Uruguay, the bees are mostly Africanized. But as you get to the south, the bees are European bees. And that insert box is shown to the left. And it shows that they're looking again at genes. So this is a study by Caffey, and we're going to get to California, why Caffey was doing this study in 2020, and looked at the bees using other data, looked at the bees in Argentina. So the northern part of Argentina, the green, were bees that were a mixture of stock. mostly had some Africanized genetic markers, some not. And as you went further south into Argentina, the blue signifies that those were European style bees. Now, of course, we know Argentina is a major honey producing area, and that's all with European bees in the south of Argentina. What happened in both Uruguay and Argentina is the beekeepers agreed with authorities that we would set up quarantine zones so that the northern part of the state bees would not be, countries would not be mixed with the southern parts. So the beekeepers in cooperation, mostly voluntary, certainly the beekeepers in that area voluntary, agreed that they would not mix stock. So Argentina, southern Uruguay continue to be very great beekeeping areas, a huge amount of production with European stock, with European bees, maintained by queens of European bees raised in that area. But their northern boundaries of them are a mixture. In some years, there's more Africanized, in some years not. The bar at the bottom here, just above the reference, shows that the blue signifies European and the red Africanized. And you can see that as you go from southern Argentina north, you go from mostly blue or a little bit of green, the mixture, to mostly red in the northern part. So looking at bees in California, Caffey et al. Looked and said and tried to determine, is there also a hybridized area developing in California? So that if you look at bees in San Diego, Ventura County, Orange County, for example, it's the feral bees, most of them, that are not being requeened by beekeepers are Africanized. But most of the bees, as you come up along Big Sur and still in the Bay Area, are mostly European bees. And so the bar, the bar that's the second bar above, labeled California, you can see mostly from the north, the Bay Area, mostly blue with a little bit of green. But as you go further south, you go into San Diego County, you get at least a third red, at least a third green, which is a mixture, and then a third that is European stock. Okay, so it's not clear that we have a hybridization zone set up, but one of the huge differences is there is no way that U.S. beekeepers have listened at all to what has happened in South America, and they have not at all attempted to self-police and help establish, in fact, and maintain a hybridized zone. And of course, the root of most of the evil of all of beekeeping in the United States is almond pollination in the valley, because 88% of the colonies that have the ability to move, 88% of the colonies are put into that area for almond pollination. So it's a huge mixing bowl, and that is mixing genetic material, diseases, resistance to amatraz, et cetera, et cetera. So big difference is establishing through beekeeping management, a way to keep a very productive part of the world, southern Argentina, still very productive honey production wise, and the area of Northern California where we raise queens, unfortunately, they have gone a different way, and they feel that by looking at the stock of their queen mother colonies, they can keep Africanized genes out of that material. Canada believes them. That's why they ship queens to Canada, with the assumption that they're not shipping Africanized bee material there. So with the exception of that one group, the queen producers of mostly Northern California, not those of the Bay Area, that's the only kind of effort by your U.S. beekeepers to reduce and somewhat limit the continued spread of Africanized bee genes into the bee population. With one of the supercomputers at NASA, we looked at distribution very early in the distribution, where they were, and we came up with this prediction. We were naive in what we put into the data at the time. So the redder and orange colors show where the bees we thought would spread, where they would occur, and the blue areas where they would not. Okay. And you can see it would be basically most of the California, certainly all the queen rearing area of California, all the queen rearing area of Georgia and Florida, for example, and even up into Oregon and Washington State on the West Coast. And our model didn't show going up the Carolinas on the east into Virginia on the East Coast. However, another look at by another group of computer wonks at Colorado State University indicates that the populations will, some Africanized genes will spread into populations in Canada, further into the middle tier of states and further up the East Coast. So a couple different models. These are just predictions. And as I indicated, it's taken a long time to move 155 miles, over 10 years to move 155 miles in California. So this is a long-term process as they spread northward, at least into the state, in our population, the states. So in your area, the feral, the wild honeybees in your area may or may not be Africanized. We can tell better during summer and fall, and because they do better in the summer and they reproduce more rapidly, we're likely to find them in the summer and into the fall, but not during the winter or spring. Africanized honeybees swarm much more frequently than our honeybees, ours being European bees, multiplying as fast as possible. Is simply a good survival instinct. Okay, in some of the studies that students that looked at them, Mark Winston, for example, Dave Rubik, Gard Otis, real good bee researchers when they were students at the University of Kansas, found that they would set up a nuke, and that nuke or its offspring could swarm as many as 13 times in a tropical environment in 1 year. So that's lots of swarming. The bees are gleaners. They do not wait to be stimulated by hive conditions or by scout bees coming back and saying, hey, I just found something over this hill and here's what it smells like, here's what it tastes like, and if you fly these coordinates, you'll get there. All right. They leave. They're gleaners. They don't wait to be stimulated, not wait for dancing bees to tell them where they've got to go. Okay. They are not good honey storers. If foreign conditions are poor, they abscond. In other words, they leave. One of the aspects, I mean, we have absconding. What we would call a swarm in September, October is not the definition of a swarm. A swarm is a division of a colony leaving behind developing queen cells. Well, absconders don't leave behind. They hatch all their brood and then they just leave. In tropical areas, you can often go a few hundred miles, less than 300 miles, and find something new and survive to live another day. In our climate, they leave in September, October. Those swarms, those quote absconds, not swarms, absconds have very little chance of survival of winter. Okay, so adaptive behavior for where they live, not for us as beekeepers in a little bit northern California and up here in Oregon, for example. They have multiple biological means to maintain their own hygienic identity and change identity of European bees. We talked about that. Mating preference of Africanized drones. The Africanized queens mate later in the day. Only Africanized drones are there. The European bees have gone home to eat their ice cream and strawberry shortcake. They're not in the field to mate anymore, but the Africanized drones are there, just in mating isolation. Okay. Commercial bees, by
Question?
requeening. Yes.
If you go back to the map of the projected African bee population by NASA in the future. I'm very curious, what's wrong with Mississippi and Alabama? Why are they not Africanized? What is the conditions there that would?
Yeah, $64,000 question. Part of it is political. They say they don't have them. Louisiana and Mississippi and Alabama say they don't have them because no one has looked, of course. Alabama is a closed state. You can't move bees in or through Alabama from one state to another through Alabama. But that's also the $64,000. We don't know why. So we put into our model where they were, and so based on the model, we then looked at what we thought were important climatic conditions. It turns out that we think the reason they were not as heavily pioneered with the populations as Texas and California is because of the pattern that they have of rainfall. Not necessarily, we put in a model how much rain. We put into the model the lowest temperature, average temperature during winter months, those type of things. It turns out that they're measuring their environments differently than we gather weather data and can put into our model. That's the simplest explanation I have.
Can I
Thank you.
ask a question? If you say they don't store honey very well, does that mean they don't get north where snow is and where cold temperatures are? Is it
Correct. Yes.
okay?
They are not a bee that prepares for winter. Okay, it's not in there. They're not. Our bees to prepare for winter have to store. What do you say there in the guild? You have to have bees that got a super, the equivalent of a super of honey to get through winter because they're European bees. They need that much honey because they cluster during the winter or get through winter. So your bees need anywhere from 40 to 60 pounds on average to get through the normal winter that you guys have. All right. As you go to Minnesota, that average is getting closer to 80 to 100 pounds because it's a longer winter, colder temperatures. And so in their tropical, neotropical environment, there's no such thing as a winter. If the resources dry up, there's no more pollen or nectar. You don't stay there and hunker down. You abscond. That's your behavior. That's what you do. And so that's what these bees do when rather than trying to store massive resources, they simply leave looking for resources somewhere else. That's their behavior. For me in Bolivia, for my family in Bolivia, keeping bees, what we continually do is take the outer frames. So we are one box beekeepers. They don't build huge populations anyway. So we are one box standard laying straw type boxes in our colonies. And we then continually harvest the outer frames because what happens if we do not, then they stop working for us. So every week we are pulling the outer frames out of our colonies and harvesting them. And that's the only way we can get any decent harvest. Now, we're in a country where honey is not important. People don't eat honey on toast or put it in tea. Honey is a medicine. And so we gather honey only to help the medicine go down. We put propolis and we put pollen and we put royal jelly into the honey, and that's what we sell. We sell very little honey per se because people don't eat honey in the rest of the
Caron?
world. Yes.
We're kind of at a point where we need to
Okay.
sort of
Okay.
wrap it up.
All right.
Just our time.
One thing that hasn't happened, all those warnings to killer bees. Okay. We haven't had the massive amounts of deaths, certainly not what Venezuela, and certainly not what Brazil experienced initially, and Bolivia, et cetera, et cetera. And we haven't is because we've got much better medical services and we had lots of warnings to stay away from bees and a big advice, and you can find a lot of good advice on how to avoid them. All right, so let me stop there. And so that's one of the good things that hasn't That's one of the other things that we predicted that thankfully has not come true. So let me stop my sharing. And I don't know if we have any more time for questions. I'd be glad to try to answer any questions you might have. Hope that didn't stop sharing. This will. Well, okay.
Yeah.
Have we any time for any more questions? No. Yes? Maybe?
I have
Hi
a
there.
question. I have a question. What were the results in Brazil? Did they increase their honey yield at all?
Yes.
They did?
Yep. And the reason they have in part is because they have taken that population, that ecotype, the African stock, and they have mixed it in with European bees. So if you put enough European genes into the population, the true hybridized bee, you get honey production.
Hi, I have one last question, back on that map where you had decided that the northern climes of the United States were too cold. That I assume that did not take into account the warming of the northern parts of the United States and Canada by climate change, which
No, this
Yeah,
was
so-
before we had met, and we couldn't build models of climate change. We could now, but we couldn't at the time. That's true. The other thing that we didn't take into account is humans, bees, people moving bees. And that happens all the time. There was some confusion. I'm sorry that I was not there to join you tonight in person. I would much prefer to do this in person so we could have a much better discussion. If your question doesn't get answered, that you saw my email there. Maybe I can go back and put my email so you can see it again. There it is there. It is DM Caron, my last name, at udel.edu, or you can use my one here from Oregon State. It's last name Caron with a D, oregonstate.edu.
Thank you so much, Doctor. I also wanted to plug his book, Honeybee Biology and Beekeeping, if you're in the room here and you want to see it.
Oh, thank you.
It's
Thank
a great
thank
book.
you.
And the California Master Beekeeping Program likes to use that book. So if you're interested in that too,
They
it's
do,
another,
yeah. And if
so-
you don't have your own copy, would like one, like to have an autograph one, give me an email. I'll sell you to it at a little bit of a discount.
Thank you, sir. Is that it? Any Zoom questions? Last few seconds. Okay.
I hope
thanks
some of
very
it
much.
was of informative and some without being too scary, and appreciate your attention tonight. As I say, I wish I could have been there in person, but at least we had a chance to do a little bit of chatting. Thank you. I did a lot of talking. You did a little bit of chatting. Thank you.
A lot of applause in the room. Thank you very much.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Thank you. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.